Big dysfunctional family. All right, I'm going to find the right distance from this very hot mic. Thank you for coming. Just quick show of hands. How many people either were at B-Sides or DEF CON for the revelation of the Cavalry? Okay. How many of you also watched the video if you weren't there? Okay, I'm going to take a side door on this, in part out of respect for Nick, because Nick shared half the content there, and also because we've just done so much more work since DEF CON just a couple weeks ago. So just to frame this, because there's been some confusion, you are in the Cavalry talk at noon downstairs in Belmont from noon until they throw us out tomorrow night. DerbyCon and Dave have given us a space to do the Cavalry Constitutional Congress, and we have a very detailed agenda. We have a lot of participants who've done a lot of homework in advance, and that's pretty much where we try to flesh out our identity, our beliefs, our mission, our vision, and a ton of people have put a lot of good work into that, and we want your criticism, your feedback, your wishes, your hopes, your desires, your fears about how to do that. So I'm trying to avoid duplicating content. This should essentially tell you why we're so convinced we need to start taking more control over our own fate, and there is where we do the hard work to do so. So, thank you for coming. So, I'm not going to be the one responsible for breaking you. We're doing a pretty good job of that ourselves, but I'm finding more and more, I had a pretty tough year and a half, and I'm finding that you really have to have that rock bottom moment before you can really critically analyze the things that are important to us, the things that work, the things that don't, and decide if you're motivated enough to do something about it. There's this Alcoholics Anonymous thing. I'm probably going to have it actually in the slides later, but it basically says you have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And for lots of different reasons, that applies to us. If you're more of a scientific bent than Alcoholics Anonymous, then one of my professors once said, no one changes until the pain of maintaining inertia exceeds the pain of making change. And I'm not sure where you are in your journey. Some of you have been there a long time. Some of you burned out years ago. Some of you are going through the throes of that. But for one talk, at least, during this con or during any place I can do so, I want to focus us on not the enterprise security we do, or the security service we provide to companies, but the security that affects you as a person, as a father, as a husband, as a wife, as a mother, as an uncle, as an aunt. Because this used to be our profession, right? I mean, our hobby. Most of us didn't do this as a career. We started as a hobby. And when we weren't paying attention, it became our profession. And some of us love the work we do. It's challenging, it's ever-changing, there's never a dull day. But it also has started to wear on us. And I think there's a third wave now, which is that while we weren't paying attention, what we do actually permeates every single aspect of our personal lives. And our best and brightest are focused more on finding the next flaw in Android. And we're not even paying attention to the fact that there's an operating system in every car I tried to buy recently. And, Jay Radcliffe was, literally almost died from a flaw in his insulin pump. And the Internet of Things, I keep seeing these fluffy commercials on television about how the Internet of Things is a wonderful utopian state, and I'm thinking, I'm terrified by the Internet of Things. I'm not a Luddite, I'm not an unreasonable person on this. It's just that I see we are depending more and more on technology, and we can't even solve SQL injection, which we've known about for over 13 years. So I want to spend some of our time, some of our emotional energy on security that matters, security that affects your personal life and your families. So, first off, I'm not an expert on this, but in general, as I was saying, I do worry about these things, and I increasingly worry about them. And, maybe it was my diminished emotional state, but you have to really start asking, is what I'm doing actually having the impact I want to? Are we getting better enough, fast enough? So this is a bit of an amalgamation of some of the other, journey I took in that discovery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me, but it's not because I'm important. I don't matter at all. These things will either resonate with you because you've experienced them or you're going through them, or they won't. But I'm going to start the only place I can, which is me. And I'm actually getting sick of saying this part, but I'm getting better at feeling good about it. My close friends know that my mom had a really bad stroke last fall, about this time. And we thought she was getting better, but it eventually turned out to be the Ted Kennedy brain cancer, and we had to watch her slowly die, and it was gut-wrenching, you know. Very young, 58 years old. And that process for me, it's not that I started being altruistic because my mom got sick. It's that I became hyper-conscious of time, down to the minute. Like, is this minute a wasted minute? Or am I doing the things I want to do? She was about 6 months from retirement, you know, going to spend more time with her grandkids, and she didn't get to. You know, we always say, well, we'll do it later, we'll do it later. But it really kicked me in the stomach, and it made me do two things. I already said one, but one thing is it crystallized what was important to me. Crystallized. And the other thing it did was it made me hyper-conscious of time. So I started being more emotionally naked, more emotionally raw, talking to my friends, and it's very interesting when you start getting past the cynical bits and bytes and the technical solutions we have amazing people with amazing stories, amazing talents, and we never get to that level. You know, we might go drinking, we might do some karaoke when we had too much bourbon, but we don't actually get to that human level. And it turns out that I thought I was very alone in my frustration with industry, and it turns out there's quite a few of us concerned about our future. Maybe not the same exact point. But for me, I found that the more naked and emotional I was about it, the more I connected with others. And we started finding that we had quite a few willing to try something different. A Navy SEAL I met, he put it better than I could, but he said he wanted to be a passionate, purposeful, principled protector and provider. And besides the fact that I absolutely love consonance and alliteration, it's actually, you know, pretty cool. And when I gave my my mom's eulogy in January, I just had in my head, you know, how would I want to be known? You know, how would I want my legacy to be? You know, what did my mother do? What am I going to do? How do I live my life such that I have earned the right to be known by these things? And, you know, I couldn't do it for trying to figure out what, I couldn't do it for her, but I tried to say, it was right after the Sandy Hook shootings, right? And as a father, that was pretty bad. But one of the things I realized is, you know, the minister at her church was saying something like, we don't know why there's evil in the world, and blah, blah, blah. And it made me really, really angry because it kept making it look like we're passengers and we're spectators. And one of the things I really liked about how she lived is she basically tried to put goodness in the world everywhere she could. Her license plate said, be kind. So she really wanted the first impression that some really over-the-top, gushing, happy person's coming at you, which I found nauseating. But you know, her attitude was, it's not that there's evil in the world, it's that we need to put good into it. So, you know, I was thinking about physics, and I'm thinking about all my college courses, and, you know, I said it's not about the evil in the world. Of course there's evil in the world. It's about, how did I put it? You never say it as well as when you're at a funeral, right? What I said was, you know, maybe it's not the presence of evil, it's the absence of good. Because cold is the absence of heat, right? And darkness is the absence of light. So maybe we should stop watching the things we don't like and put something into the world that we want to see there. It doesn't mean we can fix it. You know, often insurmountable odds. But I kind of chose at that moment that, you know, it felt a little bit like whatever she was putting in the world now fell to me to do so. So I'm saying the same thing to you guys. So how I wanted to be known is I want to be honest at all times, even if it's uncomfortable. I want to tackle problems even if they're hard. But mostly I want to be of consequence. And that might not be your 3 words, but those are the 3 things that I'm trying to use to drive my actions. So let's get to the security stuff. So in that hard period in January, I was trying to ask myself, are we getting better as a security profession? And while I was on the couch, anybody know what this number is? Okay, so the headline that week was, I think it was the New York Times, had been hacked by China. And the market-leading antivirus provider that serviced them threw them under the bus and blamed them for not buying more of their products. And we don't need to get into which one it was, but essentially they missed 44 of the 45 viruses. And we tend to ask, if I were to ask you in the hallway, what's the efficacy of signature antivirus, most of you guys would say something like, you know, 90% eventually, you know, as long as you keep your signatures updated. This is not 90%. Anybody got good math skills? That's not 90%. So then I said, okay, well, at least some of us know you shouldn't overdepend on signature antivirus, right? No one just uses that. So then, next couple days, this number came up. Anybody know what this is? Yeah, so if you were one of those lucky people who knew you couldn't overdepend on blacklisting, perhaps you could try whitelisting. And I'm not naming and shaming a victim here, but this same week, Bit9 was whitelisting application, whitelisting technology was found to be compromised for over a year. And they weren't even the target. You know, the target was their customers. They were a stepping stone, just like the RSA breach. But I'm like, wow, if you're one of those people, one of those few, one of those 1% that actually knows you shouldn't overdepend on signature antivirus, man, it's getting really hard to actually defend anything. And then, of course, the coup de grace was the APT1 report and all the Candy Crowley on CNN talking about hack attacks as if they're like a Big Mac attack. I still have a picture of, and what I said is, you know, on the one hand, thank God we finally have mainstream recognition of what we do. It's about time. And on the other hand, I saw we're not actually controlling the narrative. We're not even at the table. So there might be recognition, but it's leading to fear and ignorance. It's not leading to actual progress or opportunity. So if you recall that progression, then you went to RSA feeling about the way I did, which is, oh boy, right? So I've been asking a question for a while, are we getting better? And my simple answer is no. You know, I had a big argument with Bruce Schneier about this. He said, well, we are getting better, we're just getting worse faster. I said, okay, fair enough. You know, we are getting better in certain areas. You can find certain accomplishments, not that many, but we're getting worse faster. And I don't want to lament this. I want to fight it, right? So Einstein's insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So we can't keep doing that, right? So one of the questions I was saying is, how would you know if you're getting better or not? And in my more corporate speeches, I will say, you know, for a long, long time, I've been working with CISOs, especially when I was an analyst, and I said, there's 5 sources of constant and turbulent change. And I'm not going to get into the entire speech, but basically the externalities are changes in threat, changes in technology, changes in compliance, changes in business, and changes in economic climates. So when I marshal people through this in like a consulting type workshop, I'll ask, are we getting better, worse, or the same on any of those? And if you really think about it, just at the macro level, right? Not microeconomics, macro security here. We have more threats than ever, more types of them. It's not like we got fewer, right? Technology's being adopted more quickly. We have more compliance regimes and they're not going away. You just get your hands around PCI and you have FedRAMP. You know, I mean, there's always something new. There's more coming with the executive order. Is the business appetite for change going down or going up? Are you getting huge budgets or are you getting tightened budgets, right? So whatever your criteria might be, we're at least the same or worse on most of those. But my bigger measure is I just watch my friends and my family. So some of us, I hope Casey Yared's here, but Jack Daniel, Casey Yared, Martin McKay, Gal Sponsor, and Stacy Thayer. A couple years ago, we did a stress and burnout study because we found ourselves being accidental career counselors and therapists for a lot of our friends. I don't know why they come to me. I'm not the most sensitive, caring, or empathic person, but for some reason, quite a few of our friends would come to us and saying, you know, I'm having dark thoughts, or I'm really burned out, or I hate my life. And we said, look, we're not professionals here. Well, Casey was doing his PhD work on stress and burnout. There's an independent thing called the Maslow Stress Index. And if you haven't, anybody seen this study that we did? Anybody? Okay, a couple of you. In fact, if you didn't need to see the study, just go to DEF CON this year. There was a malaise and a real fog at DEF CON this year. In fact, at B-Sides Las Vegas, it was even worse. Half the talks were about some form of burnout. And there were certain talks that weren't about security at all. They were about, you know, 3D printers or how to make cocktails. So you could definitely feel a sense of fatigue and burnout. And this talk is actually an upper, believe it or not. But what we found out is there's 3 different stress indexes for every profession, whether you're a cop, a fireman, or whatnot. And most professions that have high stress and burnout have lots of apparatus involved in testing people, finding early warning signs, giving people time off, having counseling. And those 3 measurements are, I was going to get the words right, your fatigue, so how fatigued do you feel, your cynicism, and your perceived self-efficacy. That's the big mouthful. Basically, how well do you think you're doing at your job? If you're in the red zone on any one of them, they typically put you in a get well program, or they flag you as at risk, and there's like 10 layers of depression from okay to like everything's great to yeah, you need an intervention. So you're going to end up at different levels, but we were in the red zone on 2 and kissing it on the 3rd. So on fatigue, how does Jack put it? We love our 40-hour work week so much that we do 2 of them by Wednesday. Right, so that's Jack's joke. The one that we were highest in the history of the test was cynicism. So apparently, cynicism is our core competence. Or if you're from... right. And the third one, we weren't quite on... We were near the red zone, and that was perceived self-efficacy. But there was an interesting little bell curve thing, or there's a split, where some of us feel nothing we do matters, and others of us think they do. And when we try to dig into it, our current hypothesis, we would need to actually ask better questions the next time we do this. But our hypothesis is some of us feel pretty good because we passed the audit, or we think we're doing okay. And then when you hit bottom, you hit it hard. So I think the schism in the data there is really between a false sense of security. But the bottom line isn't so much that we have a harder job than most. The one testimonial that still confuses me is there was a former police officer in the audience. He'd been doing a SWAT team kicking doors in for the DEA for 15 years. And he told us that his 3 years as an InfoSec guy were far more stressful than being a cop. And I just still cannot compute. It does not add up in my head. But he had a bunch of reasons why. And essentially, I don't think it's that we're beautiful, unique snowflakes and that we're the only people who have stress. I think that we haven't diagnosed it. We aren't aware of it, the power it has over us, and we lack the support infrastructure and the apparatus for us to take better care of each other. So there's different responses one can have, but to me, all that, the confluence of, my grieving and my seeking better answers on how we're getting better basically said, there's a really amazing 15-minute talk. It's one of the early TED Talks. It's by this guy named Simon Sinek. And watching it really crystallized this for me. He goes through various things like which companies were more successful than other companies, which agents of change in history were more successful than others. And what he has is this little golden circle. He says there's a why you do something, there's a how you do it, there's a what, and almost every single company in the world can tell you what they do. We build widgets, right? Some of the better ones can tell you how they do it, or how they do it differently than their competitors. But almost no one can tell you why they do what they do. And he said everything he's learned from every great speech, whether it was the Wright brothers, defying the odds and having everything working against them and getting flight, or whether it was Martin Luther King, or whether it was Steve Jobs, or whoever you want to idolize, the best speakers, the best thinkers, the best change agents focus first on why. The whole Apple think different thing was the idea. But essentially, if people don't do what you do, they do why you do it. And I'm not going to try to replicate his speech, but it really focused me on, we have a lot of what and how, but we don't have a lot of why we do what we do. We don't really focus on why does it matter. Does it matter? And that's why, as a father, as someone concerned about my own safety, this is where some of the seeds of the Cavalry came. Is, could we actually ask ourselves why we're doing what we're doing, why we're concerned about it, and can we translate the why and the value and the motivation to the people who are trying to do it? And the best CISOs do this in the corporate context, right? They don't tell you what to do. They get buy-in and they get the stakeholders to understand this, right? And the same is true for my neighbor if I'm talking about car hacking. You don't want to just scare them. Right? So anyhow, I think this was the impetus behind one of the things I noticed a long time ago. I made this replaceability thing when I was arguing with the metrics people. I said, look, we have a lot of data on credit card numbers. They're highly replaceable. Every one of us has lost one. Nothing bad happened, right? I'm not saying don't care about them, but I'm saying our best and brightest researchers and all the CFP talks, they're so heavily loaded to our most replaceable asset types because they're the most visible. There's lots of reasons why we do that. But I said, look, intellectual property is harder to replace. Trade secrets, harder to replace. Human life. Poor Jay Radcliffe has that insulin pump failure. I don't want to lose him. He's kind of a good guy. But when I started researching Anonymous for the last couple of years, a lot of their grievances were encroachment on civil liberties. And now that the Snowden stuff's happened, a lot more people care about that than they did maybe a year ago. But our best and brightest in most of our talks and most of our conferences are focused on the most replaceable asset types. And I knew that was at the opportunity cost and neglect of the things that actually affected my family. So the single easiest way I can answer to a policymaker or a layperson as to how I know we're not getting better, I'm going to have to say this twice because it never sinks in the first time. Our dependence on IT and software is growing faster than our ability to secure it. I'm going to say that one more time. Our dependence on software is growing faster than our ability to secure it. Maybe I spend too much time with Dan Gear, I don't know. So I think about it, and if you go to Shodan right now, you can find industrial control systems directly connected to the internet. You don't even need Metasploit to pop them. Some of these have default usernames and passwords. That's a level of dependence that's not intelligent, merited, responsible. But we have it. You know, I was on a panel with H.D. Moore. He goes, from my phone, I can blow up a boiler in a church in the UK. So it's not so much that we have to make it bulletproof. There are some cases where if you cannot depend on the software, we shouldn't depend upon it. You can do either one. We can either do a better job at securing these things, or you can depend less upon it. I had the hardest time trying to buy a car recently because I had to ask people like Chris Weissopel, which car is least likely to get me killed? Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek had not yet told me which cars they hacked, but I knew they had hacked 2 cars. I'm like, is this one of them? Is this one of them? And it's not so much, again, that I'm a Luddite. It's that I think even our digerati here don't realize how incredibly connected our cars are. It's not that software is new in cars. They've been there a long, long time. It's that the number of remote access protocols has gone up. And the one that I completely forgot is most cars now from certain manufacturers have parking assist, which has full control over the steering column. So if you saw the Andy Greenberg video, you can turn the wheel without the driver at 45 miles an hour. That's not good. Not good. You can deploy the airbags when they don't need to be at full speed. And it's not so much that, you know, I think we should like smash all of our computers, like play our piano. I think it's more a matter of, do we have intelligent folks who understand things like least privilege and segmentation and isolation and air gapping and secure design and reference monitors and system integrity? No. Now, in the process of starting the Cavalry, we're finding that there is, in fact, one of our best and brightest working for a car manufacturer. So we are starting to do this, but in general, I don't want to wait until there's lots of fatalities before we actually start engaging the automotive industry. And then our good friend Jay Radcliffe and our dearly departed Barnaby, there were very, very few people investigating medical devices. But, you know, there's this guy, actually I think you went to school with him, Kevin Fu. He's an academic researching medical device flaws, and it's not just insulin pumps and pacemakers. There's lots and lots of fatalities in hospitals just due to random network noise causing failures on generic medical pumps. And it's really tough to tell how many of those deaths are due to, sometimes they're listed as an overdose or as a system failure or something like that. It's not like some hacksaw is trying to kill patients on an IV. But there's tons of flaws in here, and the FDA is starting to try to figure it out. But there's very, very few researchers, and there's very little substantive progress on how do we actually ratchet this up. In fact, Dave Kennedy was just recently on the news talking about that this is becoming a big problem. He's so photogenic on television, isn't he? And recently there was just a round of comments to the FDA, and a couple of us knew about it, so a couple of us are starting to provide commentary there. But, you know, this is your physical safety. And even if it's not going to manifest this year, maybe it's 10 years from now, it's going to take a while to teach these different supply chains or these different vendors the kind of learning curve we went through with Microsoft after the infamous trusted computing memo. And it's going to take a while to teach them how not to sue the researchers, but maybe even get to through the stages of grief towards bug bounty programs, right? And I just don't want to wait for that. You know, that old Chinese proverb of dig a well before you're thirsty. But these threats to body, mind, and soul really concern me. So as a joke, you can do this with a Grease Monkey script if you like. In fact, there's probably already one on GitHub. Anytime you see for the next 24 hours software, think vulnerable, right? Such that if you have a toaster and you add software to it, you now have a vulnerable toaster. Similarly, the bigger issue is actually the connectivity. If you see connected, switch it to exposed. Now, I can't remember who it was or which car manufacturer, but someone left my talk the first time I said this and said, Josh, I just saw a television commercial for a 4-door hatchback vulnerability on wheels. And I said, all right. I'm like, awesome. Yeah, so in general, you know, the Internet of Things is not a dream come true for me. It's a nightmare. I am not comforted by the Internet of Things. I am discomforted by it. And it's an entirely different set of vendors who've never even heard of software development life cycles, let alone struggled to implement one. And I'm not that concerned if my fridge gets hacked, but there are certain things that it's just not intelligent or responsible to do. And we don't, just like we have underwriters laboratories type things to make sure that your toaster doesn't catch your house on fire, there's absolutely no such equivalent for the software risks inherent in these devices. I'm going to skip this part. All right, I'm going to make fun of OWASP just because it's fun. I love and hate OWASP. Essentially, I had a big fight with some of the OWASP people recently this spring. I said, screw the OWASP top 10. I want an OWASP top 1. We've had almost identical lists since the beginning of OWASP, and we have a tremendous amount of technical solutions and a lot of volunteerism and a lot of excellent technical work. We don't have sufficient demand, right? We have supply, we don't have demand. So we keep bringing a technical solution to what I think is first and foremost a cultural problem. So one of my thought experiments was, let's pick something like SQL injection and go really, really deep on one thing. And let's fix one thing. And even if we can't fix it, that one should be fixable, by the way, if you know anything about how that works. I think what it will reveal is that if we actually focus on one thing, do it well, we're not going to have technical bottlenecks. We're going to have educational bottlenecks, cultural bottlenecks, the inability to talk to stakeholders. And essentially, I don't think the bottlenecks are going to be writing another ESAPI. But that's a longer conversation. But in general, one of the things I want the Cavalry to do is we have a lot of activity in the industry. We have very little effect or results. So one of the things we have as a notion of kill chains, not kill chains to like the Lockheed Martin to kill someone, but to influence from soup to nuts. How do you flag something and get it changed through the FDA? We also do a lot of symptomatic things. We might focus on the superficial and never get to root causes. So we're keenly focused on what are the upstream root causes of some of our issues. We've had 15 plus years of solving easy problems. What happens when you only solve the easy problems? What are you left with? Anyone? Anyone? The hard problems, right? We have this magical religious belief in 80-20 rule that whatever we're doing is automatically the right part of the 80-20 equation, whereas I think we have it exactly backwards. Anytime someone tells me they're doing best practices, I know they aren't. And anytime someone says good enough, I know it isn't. So what can you do about it? There's two things. Well, and in fact, I'm seeing both of them with tremendous passion. Some people are screaming at us for the ideas behind the Cavalry, and some of us are being very hopeful and very active in making it good. And I'm not going to judge either one. We're going through a learning curve here. But for the people that actually want to make some progress or try something, it's time we stop going to well-worn, well-mapped parts of the universe, and we have to go to the dark edges of the map. It's time for some uncomfortable experimentation, things that are unnatural to us. But the alternative is keep doing the same things over and over and over. Okay. So, one of the core beliefs as we started this is it's not about, should we make like a PCI type thing, right? That is a hypothesis, right? And you don't have to have one experiment at a time. We have to try lots of things. And at my most cynical about what we will do with the Cavalry, and that's not the permanent name, by the way, is think of it as an incubator for finding people who actually want to try something new, connecting them with each other that have similar experiences, and incubating and encouraging and fostering and hypercharging into giving support to those experiments. It's more about aggregating the people who haven't completely given up or who want to try something new or who are willing to do parallel experimentation. There's a school of thought of fail fast and iterate. We just fail fast and repeatedly. I don't mind if we fail the first 10 attempts trying to push something through the Food and Drug Administration, but we should start that experimentation right now. In fact, there has been some. We just haven't done it in a coordinated way. So I'm not really going to pitch this slide the way I normally do, but I teach a one-day course for a Carnegie Mellon grad program, and in it we talk about the things that asymmetrically benefit the actual security of something. If you're at all interested in the civil liberties debate, make me use this slide for that later. But essentially, the things that actually have the most impact on your ability to secure something aren't the aftermarket security countermeasures. Those are the empty calories. It tends to be software and infrastructure that is defensible, followed by operational excellence, like the Gene Kim School of Thought of visible ops. It's not about security, it's about operational rigor. change management. And then situational awareness is that we fight blindly and die quickly. The reason I'm orienting this is I did a heat map of the RSA submissions this January, and I did the same thing for Black Hat. And I did all of the talks were countermeasures for the, and remember the replaceability index. They were all for the most replaceable assets with the least effective controls. There were almost nothing further down the stack. Now, I'm not saying everyone should give up on that. I'm saying we're pretty good there. I don't need another piece of Android malware for a PCI thing or whatever, I don't know. So I'm encouraging, even if you're a narcissistic vulnerability pimp, there's a lot of blue ocean here versus that crowded red ocean. There's a lot of room for differentiation. There are very, very few people looking at metal devices, and we've just lost one of the best, right? Very, very few people. There's very, very few people, you know, Seguin comes to mind, some other people who are even paying attention to how are the new tech laws and tech impacts affecting civil liberties and whatnot. And maybe that's not your thing. But even if you're doing this purely for ego, lots of white space, right? So there you go. So we tend to be motivated by ego or puzzle solving. If you like puzzles, if we can jailbreak an iPhone, we can do a similar mapping and jailbreak of the congressional process, right? So if you're up for a challenge, yeah. Now I tend to be motivated. What's that? It's true. It's already bricked. Okay. Now we don't all have the same motivations, but I tend to have that ridiculous, naive superhero gene that you know, I'm certainly not athletic enough to be Spider-Man, but I am drawn to this, at least I tell myself, because I want to make the world a better place, right? I want to be a defender. I want to help people, even if they don't know they're being helped. So I had flirted with the idea of doing something like that. But the truth is, I don't really care what your motive is, right? People thought I was nuts when I said that, and I am sometimes. But, you know, speaking of coconuts, like if my philosophy background comes into play sometimes. Social contracts don't come out of really good people trying to be really nice to each other. It says people are savages, they're animals. They will kill you in your sleep and take your coconuts, right? Social contracts come out of rational self-interest. So be selfish, be rationally self-interested. It says, I won't kill you in your sleep and take your coconuts if you don't kill me in my sleep and take my coconuts. If you hate this coconut analogy, so do I. My professor gave it to me in college, but all I think of is coconuts when I think of social contract theory. But it's the more efficient way to be selfish, right? So if you're, regardless of if you just want to solve puzzles, if you want to protect people, if you want to have the heart of a servant, we have several motivations in this audience. But most of us are slightly concerned about the public good. And what you'll see is most of our security and innovation, our researchers, our best and brightest are really only serving enterprise needs, enterprise goods. So, you know, I made a clearly ridiculous claim in the hallway last night that sometimes I just don't give a crap about enterprise security. It's not that I don't, it's that that's all we give a crap about. And sooner or later, you're going to wake up one day and realize none of us are really researching the public good and our own public safety and our own kids. So, anyhow, pivoting to the Cavalry. One of the things I found in my uncomfortable experimentation is when I team up with someone who's really, really good at something that I'm not good at, we are way stronger together than we are alone. So most of my most gratifying and satisfying projects were when I teamed up with somebody. Even that mutated, evil, grouchy squirrel right there, right? And I've taken that a little bit further, but essentially, I already said this, I'm tired. Some of that uncomfortable experimentation, hard pivot here, is the heart of the Cavalry was how uncomfortable should the experimentation be? Should we actually look at professionalization, right? Doctors have professional organization, lawyers have professionalism. Yeah, I guess we have ISC squared, but you know, I think we all know how we feel about that. It has a charter, it sticks with its charter, and there are some people in our ranks that are joining the board, people we respect, and trying to change it from within. But what dawned on me when I was doing some of that uncomfortable experimentation last year in the Beltway with the intelligence community, with whomever, is that all their advice was coming from the vendors, all of it. I had a very, very, very scarily senior person tell me that we could stop the hemorrhage of intellectual property to China if we simply empowered the carriers and ISPs to do deep packet inspection and run signature antivirus. Just think about that for a second. He says, what do you think about that? And I said, who told you that? He goes, well, what do you think of it? And I said, the efficacy of signature antivirus for state-sponsored espionage is 0. And you should have seen his face. Now, maybe you guys could debate me. We love to debate things. But it's 0, right? Everybody pre-tests their malware. Everybody. So essentially what I said is I think the public would view that as an infringement on their Fourth Amendment rights for absolutely 0 security gain. So even if you believe that you should have a trade-off between protection and rights, that's a horribly bad trade. And it took some of those conversations for me to realize that no one's coming to save us. If that particular individual didn't understand these trade-offs and the actual facts behind that, then it falls to us. Part of the Cavalry message was the Cavalry isn't coming. And if you know that, you can be depressed about it, or you can say it falls to us. Not every single one of us. And in that moment, this is when I decided, you know what, they take advice. And it turned out the advice came from the federal CTOs of the major antivirus companies. Shocker, right? And they're not evil, right? You know, it's their prerogative. I believe in free markets and capitalism. It's that if you look, there is not a voice of the profession. There's not a voice of reason for technical literacy in the profession. We had people like Space Rogue and his buddies from Loft testify to Congress a while ago. You can go watch the video. It's awesome. You should see their hairdos. In fact, you still have exactly the same hair, just a little less of it. Okay. So one of the things I realize is there is a void, and that void will be filled by someone else. So one of the experiments we can do is seeking how do we get a voice of reason. Now, I'm not saying that some of us could ever speak for all of us. That's not the point. We are so fragmented in our beliefs, I'm not looking to create a voice that represents all hackers. I think that would be a mistake. Another thing is we should look at the litigation stuff. So there's lots of little initiatives. There's one called Fork the Law that Meredith Patterson and some others started. If you're watching the Weave case, there's amicus briefs written, which I guess is a phrase for the friend of the court. The Weave case, whether you like Weave or not, most of you don't. The case law coming out of that particular case is very, very problematic for researchers. So several people who do hacking or creating hacking tools are starting to hire lobbyists and lawyers for themselves because they're seeing an increased use of the CFAA to prosecute people because it's very vague. In fact, Andrea Matwishin, who's a law professor and a lawyer, is here for the Cavalry, and she's going to be talking about how many more cases are being brought up right now and how misapplied that law is becoming. She's just going to give us the facts. We can decide what we want to do with that. But essentially, we're seeing increased criminalization of basic research. There's laws in France, Germany, and Brazil that outlaw the use of basic port scanners. There's a law in Texas that accidentally outlawed port scanning. If you see the reactions to the 3D printers, what's more likely, that we're going to make the software supply chain more responsible or that we're going to sue anyone who's ever used Metasploit, right? So we also need to have a voice of reason who's deliberately engaged in the legislative and judicial processes. We talked about at DEF CON maybe starting a lobby or even hiring a lobbyist to get us access, which should have had people throw food at us. Now, as we've investigated it more and more, that one might be a stretch and it may be too hard to do without corruption. But these are part of the uncomfortable experimentations we're doing under the banner of the Cavalry to find out what we need to find out about what kind of money does it take, what are the rules, what are the ways to mess it up, should we try to do it their way or should we try to do it our way? But increasingly, there's cyber legislation, there's the executive order, which is the NIST framework going on right now. Some of the people in this room have helped do comment and feedback on the NIST framework. And we're going to try to do some of those things. Yes, and then I said a lobby. But a huge part of this is hearts and minds, and we have some of the best social engineers on the planet, but we really, really suck at communicating technical things to people outside the echo chamber. And I'm not saying social engineering to be manipulative. I'm saying it turns out that aside from Dave Kennedy and a few others, when we actually get on the news, we use jargon and we use things they don't care about, and we know how to tell them how it broke, but we don't know how to tell them why it matters to them. So we're essentially going to make a concerted effort to figure out which things actually matter to the general public, who our best spokespeople are for those, how to neutralize the jargon, and have accessible terminology to decision makers in policy and government on the news, right? All right, I'm gonna skip that part. And really what it turned out is, while I appreciated and enjoyed teaming up with individual superheroes on occasion, some of the problems are much bigger than any one of us. So yes, this is a joke. A few times with a few different cadre of people last year, I assembled pretty diverse, large teams to go tackle really tough problems in very strange places. Now, after the Snowden stuff, I can't probably get some of those to get replicated again. But imagine how you take like the thunder god status of an H.D. Moore, and you combine it with the statistician's mind of Alex Hutton, who knows what to do with the data from the recon project that he's done. Or you take an internet backbone person as chaotic as he is, like a Kaminsky. You know, any one of them is impressive on their own. It is breathtaking and inspiring to see the kind of things that came out of them popcorning off of each other on hard questions that had significance and consequence in the answer. So this is originally a thought experiment. I said, why stop with 2? Why stop with 5? And essentially, I'm trying to replicate the magic that we did several times last year in very secret places where you can't bring cell phones sometimes. But there's other ones that are more public. There was a debate over the UN taking over the internet from the multi-stakeholder model and giving it to states, and all sorts of censorship and surveillance things coming out of it. And 5 of us from industry were picked to go talk to ambassadors and people from the UN and people from NATO and decision makers in government and people from the European EU. And what was really, really awesome is they desperately wanted to hear what we had to say. What was really, really not so awesome is we didn't know what we wanted to tell them. So I think there's a readiness where the boundaries between our hobby and our profession have now leaked into things that actually affect your life. And now it's time that some of us, for some of our time, if it strikes a chord in your heart, or you're worried about the criminalization research, or you're worried about your safety, or you're worried about your civil liberties, we have, oh, there's the evil squirrel. We don't have Scarlett Johansson, but we do have an evil squirrel. Anyhow. Some of you guys think this is ridiculous. Some people in the hallway told me that we were a bunch of jerks and idiots and evil bastards. I don't care. I don't need their buy-in, because I do care. You know, we're going to have some thick skin, and we are very cynical and we are very defeated, but the choice is this. If you can tell me all the reasons why this foolhardy initiative to try to do something of consequence that affects our lives is going to fail, you've implicitly already decided that what we're doing doesn't matter and won't have an impact. I know this will be hard. We put tons of work into it. I just know we need to be better. And here's the very, very ugly slides in the last 2 minutes I have. Essentially what we're going to slice up is, we said there are threats to our body, our mind, and our soul. Body is going to drive much more research and researchers towards things that save human lives. Someone told me that was too aggressive of a comment. Putting a man on the moon is too aggressive of a comment. You work backwards and you say, what actions do we need to take over the next 5 to 10 years such that we can actually have a material impact on protecting people from irresponsible use of technology? So that's the body. The mind is that many of us feel an increased criminalization of research, and that the laws are either outdated or the new laws might actually make things worse. And part of the reason we're going to do the hearts and minds on things that actually affect public good and public safety is when they go to make those laws, we want them to have to be really careful such that they discourage the illegal researchers, but encourage and protect the beneficial research. And the soul part is some of the stuff I did with Anonymous and whatnot, not with them, I'm researching them, which is that there's an increased mashup between, an entanglement between civil liberties and technology adoption. And we have not been in front of that to start being that voice of reason and technical credibility when we discuss the trade-offs, to give people the choices, just like really good CISOs do to their boards, but to give people informed choices about those things and actually testify to Congress public policy. So the things we're currently exploring for how to horizontally manage and manifest those is a 501c think tank and educational organization. EFF is one, but they have a narrow charter. The one that's harder and more risky, and may not actually happen, we're going to talk about that today and tomorrow, is the 501c4 lobby. A very likely one is to have a 501c6 professional organization to give testimonies on our profession. The horizontal activities are integrated media hearts and minds, where we're going to have deliberate, planful, inbound and outbound message to the rest of the world. And some of you hated this idea, but I'm actually talked to Ted recently about doing a TED InfoSec or a TED security. Right? Even if you hate TED, that audience, those viewers, that production value is some very powerful and wealthy folks who actually make things change in different circles. Now, this means your half of that receipt is we can't drop O-Day at TED. They don't care. So part of this is we need to be better on our aim and be better at communicating it. The judicial things is where we're going to, this is the coolest one, and we're going to dive into this, but right now when a law clerk looks for case law, the first thing they do is look for case law and they find none. The second thing they do is look for journals written by lawyers and they find none on cyber. I just said cyber. We are going to seed that by jointly authoring rubrics and legal arguments with law professors like Andrea, such that all they find is what we wrote. You're going to rootkit the legislative body of knowledge. And then legislative and whatnot. I'm basically out of time, but in body, you will see things like op medical or cars or Internet of Things, and each one will have a very fleshed out kill chain of influence from how you find the device to research it to recommend fixes to whatnot and whatnot and whatnot. And you know what, even if this is more like the March of the Light Brigade, where that is beautiful, but that is not war, we are going to march. So, it is time to break for lunch. If this is even remotely interesting, or if you just want to make fun of us, downstairs at noon in the Belmont, we're going to start the Congressional Constitutional Congress for taking matters into our hands, shaping our fates, and deciding which of these things are actionable. The work has already begun, and essentially the work product of this exercise is to have our identity and our mission and vision for ratification to follow the write-up. All right. No one's coming to save us. It's you or it's... I'm going to thank you, and come join the Cavalry downstairs.